But I also think this speaks a little bit to the vendor side in that we've had a bit of a challenge where, as often happens, technology vendors are in love with the technology and are not necessarily looking at the business problems and looking at the actual business value that you can create with it. And they're just sort of throwing it out there. And so, a recent article by Rex Woodbury, who he publishes the digital native Substack, and we're fans of his. He's a venture capitalist who just kind of puts out some really great, insightful stuff. And he has a new article out called "AI as a Services Revolution," and there's a lot to it. But one of the big things here was that he's sort of making the case that one of the big challenges that we're missing the killer app for AI. We're missing the thing that really is the linchpin that drives this fundamental change that then organizations build an ecosystem around. And that until that happens, or maybe more to the point, if you're the organization that does that, then you have the opportunity to really stake some ground, and that's the part of the missing link. That right now, so far, we have people like OpenAI and Microsoft just sort of throwing these chatbots out there and going, okay, go do amazing stuff with it, go be productive. And to your point, for some of us, we can figure out how to do that, but for the vast majority, it's just like, now what do I do with it? And that's sort of the gap.
Yeah, I thought Rex brings up this interesting quick framework about what makes an LLM kind of work, or an AI startup works. And he has this 3 steps. Basically, 1, pick a large text-heavy services industry. Number 2, use LLMs to automate workflows. Number 3, use industry-specific data. And that makes a whole lot of sense. And I know a recent announcement in the legal tech space was a Clio, kind of the market-leading legal tech company there, raised $900 million. It's the most money that any legal tech company has ever raised. And I'm sure it's because of this, because people are seeing this opportunity to get into a market leader in one of these text-heavy markets and then totally transform the workplace. And whether that works or not, the money is their venture capital firms and PE firms, private equity firms have tons of money right now that they are just trying to figure out where to put. So this seems as good of a bet as any.
Yeah, well, they're sort of playing roulette with it, but I think
Yeah.
Going back and some of my skepticism over the Salesforce Workday announcement is rooted in this, right? It's like, well, where is that killer app? Where is that that formula that Rex just lays out?
Mm-hmm.
Where does that play here? And it doesn't really, right? It's just sort of providing access to the data, and that may be nominally useful and nominally productive gaining, but the key word in that is nominal. And so if it's going to truly be transformative, it has to be something that actually changes that paradigm. And I think that is a challenge. So I think there's definitely the vendor side. I also think it's the CIO side. So there's another article from CIO.com, which I'm normally not a fan of a lot, even though I've written historically for CIO.com. I've generally not been very pleased with their articles, but lately they've been producing some really good stuff. And this is another one. I think we've referenced 2 just this week. And this one talks about the fact that CIOs have finally sort of crossed the chasm here, where the predominant posture is that of being a change agent, which, if you've spent any time talking to CIOs over the last couple of decades, that hasn't been the case. And this article makes a really interesting point, not because CIOs haven't wanted to be, but they were sort of boxed in. And the rise of Gen AI has sort of knocked down the gates, so to speak. And now it's like, okay, you need to be leading this change forward. You need to help us figure out how to leverage this technology to take advantage of this momentum and to figure out what to do with this. And so now it's like it's shifted, and that CIOs have to be that change agent. And I thought it was something I believed for a very long time. So I was gratified to sort of see some data backing this up. And then I think that also leads then to this whole conversation about, well, part of that being a change agent is taking a very aggressive stance on how to effectively leverage these technologies, and not just go, and no offense to Microsoft and their copilots, but not just drop a Microsoft copilot on someone's desk and say, good luck, right? It's about how do you do that? And so there's another article about Morgan Stanley and some of their approaches to it, but I'll pause before we get to that part of it and just kind of take your read, because I know you spend a lot of time talking to CIOs. as well. I mean, what's your sort of, do you think this is finally the moment?
Yes, I'm actually glad to see it because I feel like for the past decade, we've talked a lot about the CIO role often being honestly more of an operational role where your job is to just to keep the lights on. And we were figuring out, is the CIO becoming the chief utilities officer, or where networking and uptime is basically the same as your water bill or your electric bill, just things that need to be turned on. And now we're actually talking about the innovation that has to go along with technology. And it's odd to me to some extent that we've had to create all of these new types of positions like the chief digital officer or chief technology officers has been a little bit older, but we have all these other chief roles that honestly are the CIO's job. But so many CIOs got pushed away from the tech or just didn't keep up with modern technologies. So we had to make up these new jobs to talk about what the CIO does. And now we're getting back to having the CIO, the information officer, actually in charge of informing and information and how work needs to become more digital. That's always been the CIO's job. And now we're getting back to making that a core CIO responsibility again across the board. I think that is the right way to go fundamentally.
Yeah. I agree. I've said that for a long time, is that if you're a CIO and suddenly your company hires a chief data officer, a chief transformation officer, a digital officer, that just is a sign that you're probably not doing your job and you need to kind of step that up. And I do think there's another, I don't know if we talked about it on the show or not. July 8th, there was a Wall Street Journal article that talked about the fact that finally the majority of CIOs are reporting to CEOs that CIO pay is skyrocketing. And it's all these same reasons. These are all the same thing, because I think the role has finally reached that point. And I agree with you. I think that, whatever we call a title, but the information at least indicates that it's not just about the technology. It's about the application of that technology into business value in some way. And that is what the CIO's job should always have been, and is most certainly all about now. How do you create competitive advantage? And I know we're running out of time. We've been running long, but the article that we referenced about Morgan Stanley, what I think is interesting about it here is less than specific. It's about the fact that Morgan Stanley is not taking OpenAI's platform off the shelf, but instead is working in collaboration with OpenAI to sort of create their own. Whether that's the right strategy or not is sort of irrelevant. I think there's a bunch of different versions of this. Cohere, which is another LLM company that is building enterprise-specific tool sets to build this. Of course, Databricks and Snowflake, we've talked a lot about in the past, and their ability to help enterprise create LLMs. I think that the salient point here is that the Morgan Stanley CIO is coming to market and saying, we need to be leveraging this technology to create competitive advantage. We need to build it into our workflows. We can't just do what I was talking about, just throwing it over the wall and hoping workers find productivity out of it. Mm-hmm. We need to take this proactive stance. And I think that's the big, if you put these two together, if you're going to be a change agent, right now, part of that is leading this change and figuring out how to make AI work for your organization. And don't just assume you can sign up for another subscription and assume it's going to do anything.
Yeah, and it comes back to first understanding what the killer use case is for your organization. A lot of thought has to be put into that in the first place. And then starting to figure out the details, such as, do we need a trillion parameter model, 100 billion parameter, 10 billion parameter, 1 billion parameter model? What is going to work from a compute and storage perspective? It's going to be the nuts and bolts of creating custom software, probably with consultants at this point. That is how this market looks, because there isn't that necessarily that killer app that is widely scalable. We have a bunch of great models that are able to do interesting things, and we have to work with those models to get to the end point. So because we are at this interstitial kind of in the middle of where this is eventually going to be 5 years from now, we have to take these steps and think about them. So I think that Morgan Stanley mindset right now is actually going to be the dominant mindset in terms of actually deploying AI successfully. And just a shout out to Isabelle Bousquette, who we seem to quote, pretty much every week. Yeah, she's doing a great job covering this space, you should definitely be following her work on the Wall Street Journal if you're not already.
Absolutely. I think it's a big lesson on both sides. If you're a CIO, you need to be taking that aggressive stance, and I think the whole SaaS era, and I'm still a big believer in SaaS, right? But it sort of lulled people into thinking we can just go rent whatever we need.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to have the stronger sense of ownership over the tech. And if you're a vendor, find that sweet spot, find that space where you have that opportunity where all these are converging, and create that killer app, because that's the going to be the avenue to success in this space.